Hello, and welcome to this Gen Talk on the why, what, and how, of good research design. I'm Jennifer Kalfsbeek-Goetz, and I am the instructor for ATHS 618 Research Design and Methods. Okay, let's get started. First, the overview of what we're going to talk about in this lesson. Why do we conduct empirical or scientific research? Also, what are the basic components of good empirical research? We'll also discuss how we engage in good empirical research. What other kind would you want to engage in, right? But we'll definitely get a sense for what is good scientific study. And also, how can you use what you've learned beyond what you're getting out of this class? How does it relate to you in addition to getting through this course effectively? So first, let's talk about that first objective, which is why empiricism? Why science? First of all, this type of study is measurable. It's objective, and I put relatively in parentheses because anything with human beings is going to have its subjectivity. But the goal is always to be more objective, and it's informed. We'll talk about things like double-blind studies in medicine. And the whole idea is to achieve more objectivity when the researcher doesn't even know who's getting the treatment and who is getting the placebo. So much of what we do is to try to remove our own bias or acknowledge where it's at so that people can trust our information and believe that if they did the same study, it would also be something that they could replicate with similar results and measure it in a similar way. Also, empirical studies are to be understood as systematic exploration of research questions that are almost always grounded in existing theory. And I mention almost always in a couple slides, we'll talk to you about a rare instance in which the theory has not been generated yet. But most of the time, we're studying an element of something that we're curious about. We're trying to solve a problem that we think is really important socially, for society, for medicine, for healthcare, for education, etc. But we do so when it's empirical in a systematic, predetermined way. When we're doing a literature review or research paper, our direction might change throughout our study because the literature is sending us in another direction. That's legitimate, it's great. It's not systematic exploration. With these, you'll create a proposal of a study, and the researchers, whether they're you or others, need to follow each of those steps. That way, we know that we are not distracted by things that maybe call to us and our biases, but we follow the process. And when researchers realize they missed something, didn't think of something, or there's more to look at, they do another study. That's why there are people who professionally study and do research all the time. Empirical research is also not opinion driven, and you will work hard to ensure in your proposal that it shows that everything that you've come up with is grounded in something that is citable, referenceable, that is legitimate, and that is not just something that you thought up or hoped for, but grounded in other science and theory. All of these things lend to credibility. When a scientific study is cited, it has more credibility than someone's opinion. So we're really looking for the credible information that helps us understand why certain things are correlated with one another or why they're not, or why some things are more likely to cause or lead for something to happen, or on a more qualitative note, how people describe their experiences in different settings or with different AT devices. So the recipe that I talked about in the first introductory slide, or your proposal, which is your recipe to a future researcher, it includes the components of a good empirical or scientific investigation. So there are three possible goals that you could embark upon. Some studies will include all three. Many will include just one. Others will include two of them. We'll want to know right away, is your study exploratory, descriptive, and or explanatory? When something's exploratory, you're looking at something that hasn't really been studied, at least not in the way that you're looking at it before or much at all, and you're taking a new, fresh approach. When something's descriptive, you're really getting into the details of how or why something is experienced, but it's not usually, when it's descriptive, if it's descriptive alone, a new phenomenon, though it may be that you're exploring something and describing it, and that's certainly legitimate as well. It could also be explanatory, explaining how or why something works. And that can be the goal of the study by itself, or it could be to explain how or why something works, as well as describing elements of it. It could be all three, though that's a big bite to chew. So I would encourage you to choose one or two goals, and then for our class, most likely one. But again, if you can't resist a couple of them, that's okay too. Research studies also take on one of two cycles. The vast majority, over 90%, take on a deductive reasoning cycle versus an inductive reasoning cycle. We'll talk about this later on in the course, but the bottom line is, through deductive reasoning, there's already information out there that informs our direction, and so we are moving from a study that is already grounded in existing research and existing theories. Inductive studies are studies in which we're studying a phenomenon that hasn't really been studied. You look everywhere, you can't find anything on it. You're going to generate theory and then test that theory probably repeatedly to see if you're creating a new theory or model to put out there. Again, most of the time we are looking at something from a different angle, but it's grounded in things that already exist. And there are theories that give us some hints into where we think it might go. But every once in a while, we find we're studying something so different from what anyone else has done that we're actually generating the theory in our study, not grounding our study in theory. There are three different models that we will choose from, and you're going to choose one of these. Most of you will create a study that's cross-sectional. Now, I'll point out for you right now that you're not actually going to do these proposals in this program. So it's okay to choose the model that you would prefer rather than the one that seems the most practical to get through your program. So if you think something would be more ideal, go for it and propose the more ideal study. With the three different models, first is cross-sectional, which means that in one place in time, you conducted your surveys, you conducted your experiment, you conducted your field work, etc. And you're drawing your conclusions based on that time, space, and place. So the people are the age that they're at, they're the gender or sex that they are at, they are the generation that they're at that time and space and place. Most research that's conducted is cross-sectional. Some research is longitudinal. We want to see how something impacts someone over the course of their lives or over the course of a longer period of time, usually several years in the case of longitudinal studies. It could be shorter, but usually they're looking to see if a specific experience, it might be a traumatic experience that someone had, and they want to see if a specific kind of treatment to help them through it has a long-term impact, or if it fades over time or actually grows in its usefulness over time. And so you would conduct a study or propose one that checks in with your respondents or subjects repeatedly throughout a very clearly specified period of time, once a year, once a month, over 10 years, once every 3 years. You would define that, and you would define it based on what you've learned in the literature. Another option is cross-sequential, and that's kind of a way of mixing the two, in which it's within a period of time, maybe over the course of a semester. I'm in education, so I always think in terms of semesters, and within a semester, I grab 3 or 4 points in time that I want to look at to gather my information, because I feel like just using information at the beginning of the semester, maybe it's how stressful students are in college. Grabbing the beginning means that there's a lot of anticipation and nervousness. Grabbing at the end, finals. So grabbing throughout allows you to moderate those cyclic things that can happen within a time period. So you may choose to do something cross-sequential. It doesn't last long enough to consider it longitudinal, in which you're trying to see if something has a lasting effect, but instead it allows you to grab from different points in time in a shorter period of time so that you are sort of balancing out the impacts that that one moment in time might have. There are also three approaches that you'll learn in this class. You could take a quantitative approach, a qualitative approach, or a mixed approach. We'll spend a lot of time talking about this. A quantitative approach is utilizing tools that really give you mathematical pieces of information to assess. Quantitative are the easiest, though people are afraid to do them because they're afraid they're going to have to do the math. You're not doing the math in this class, so please don't be afraid of the quantitative elements. But most of us do quantitative research of our own all the time. We try to gauge the average number of people or average number of times that something happens. That's quantitative research and math that most of us can do relatively easily. But even understanding how many men or women are participating in a study, or how many times certain things happened, or what time of day certain things happened in their frequency, those are all quantitative approaches. Anytime you're counting something, determining the average, imagining frequency, you're doing quantitative research. You could do qualitative research. A lot of times those exploratory studies, if they have a goal of being exploratory, they're really trying to understand the context and nature and uniqueness of some sort of occurrence, or dive into the feelings or in-depth experiences of people within the study, because their research questions want them to get at that kind of more textualized and contextual information. Qualitative research can be incredibly helpful to help understand why a satisfaction survey leaned in one direction or another or came up quite neutral. It doesn't tell us why. We just know people were highly likely to take online classes since the pandemic. This is an interesting question that I've been faced with many times since we've emerged out of the pandemic. And I'll never forget the student at my college that I encountered at his local job that led me to create a qualitative element to a survey. We were coming back from COVID, and he noticed that I was wearing a mask that showed my college. And he said, "Hey, I'm a student there. I'm so excited. Are we going to have more classes in person?" And I said, "Actually, we are bringing more classes in person in the fall." And we talked a little bit more. And then I said, "So I see you on campus in the fall?" And he had gone on to tell me how much he loved studying on campus. He loved being in the classroom. He really preferred that. So with my question, I thought I knew the answer. But he said to me, "No, I actually won't be. I realize now in COVID, I can earn more money. I can help my parents take care of my little sister, and I can take any shifts that I need here at work. So I'm probably most going to be online, but I do prefer being in person." Asking students what they're most likely to do, and in a separate question, asking them what they're most likely or what they prefer more, would not get at this. I had to hear the student explain to me why and give me context. And so while we had many people fighting over what we should do in person, online, when to do which, we really needed to understand from the students why they were making the choices that they were making so that we could really best meet their needs. So that really shows you how it was important to mix quantitative and qualitative. And those are mixed studies approaches, where you may have a quantitatively derived survey with a Likert scale, and you may also have in-depth interviews or focus groups with several other people in the room. All this brings us to the point that you're going to learn about 9 different research method types. Experiments, which are more quantitative; quasi-experiments, which essentially mean that we couldn't randomly select and randomly assign people. So they're experiments, but they're missing a couple of the key elements. Secondary analysis of existing data. If you're just going to review census data and other data like that derived by state, local, or federal governments, it's a secondary analysis of data. It doesn't mean that it's not legitimate and that you're not doing something with it. You're testing it in the context of your research questions, but it's different than going out and actually being the census taker. Observations. Observations can be quantitative or qualitative. Usually they're a bit more qualitative. Surveys. Everyone thinks they want to do a survey. Many of you probably will. There are questionnaire type surveys and there are interview type surveys. You could have a more quantitative survey that only asks people to rate things on scales and pick yes, no, or multiple choice answers. Those are quantitative. Or they could be very open-ended, which are qualitative. Or you could do an interview that you allow to take you in different directions that you had not yet really foreseen. So you can see how it can be extremely quantitative all the way to quite qualitative, or you can mix it up. Also, evaluations. I'm sure all of you have been part of an evaluation at one point or another, or a program evaluation, either of a program that you're involved in or the place that you work overall is evaluated by an external source. Maybe you do it internally. Maybe you're funded by a grant and so you have to evaluate it regularly. We will talk about what good evaluations look like. Case studies are also one of the 9 most typically used research methods types. And those are usually done when a researcher wants to understand really the space and place that they're in and apply it to that similar space or place. So teachers oftentimes do case studies of their kindergarten classrooms or their middle school classrooms, and they focus their research within their classroom. Or people that work in healthcare, occupational therapy, speech language pathology, physical therapy, mental health professionals might use their patients or clients as their cases. And so the N, or the participant number, is usually small. They might just look at 5 with a specific commonality, but have a systematic way of studying something about them, probably so that they can be even better practitioners going forward. Also, field work is something that you could propose. When you think of anthropology and people going in to study other spaces and to try to enmesh themselves within those spaces so that they can engage in participant observation and really be a part of the community and take notes and gather information from the context of being close to being a member of the community, you might be doing fieldwork research. And then action research is the last kind. And action research oftentimes fits that inductive style. With action research, we're trying to understand a space, and so it's an iterative process. Any of us who are involved in continuous improvement are probably leaning towards doing some sort of participatory action research, or PAR, in which you're participating in the research, but you're also assessing it, stepping out, determining what it is that you need to know to continue assessing it, tweaking your approach, stepping back in, and it's sort of like a coily cycle to gather information, tweak what you know, try it, and then deliver it again. We could do that in our classrooms, and when an instructor is very thoughtful about what they're doing and ready to pivot when needed, action research can be a great model. So a little bit more about doing empirical research. It's critical that you plan your proposal as if others will do it. So I'll ask you to write a recipe, and I'll use the analogy, because I don't like being hit by a bread truck. I will use the analogy: you win the lottery and you take off to Tahiti, or you buy yourself a Pacific island and take yourself and your family there. You're done with work. But you hand your proposal to another person or research team. Does your proposal have everything in it that they need to do exactly what you were going to do? When you can say yes, you've got a good proposal. Another critical element of doing good empirical research is extensively and exhaustively reviewing the literature. And that doesn't mean that when you do a search in your library databases and other databases that you only use the exact words you're thinking of. You look at things also that are similar or related to that kind of research, because it can inform some of what it is that you're trying to understand. You'll toss out a lot of it in the end, but it will inform you and send you in directions maybe that you hadn't thought of, that will help shape your research, but also help you feel assured that you're grounded in what we already know out there. There's no point in studying something that we already know about. You need to choose methods that respond to your research questions. This one's critical. It's my third point. Students will frequently tell me in week 2, yeah, I figured out that I'm going to do a survey. I don't know. I want it to be about something related to assistive technology abandonment, but I've just got to figure out what kind of survey I want to do. That is the backwards way of doing what we need to do. You don't know which method type you need to use. Remember the 9 I just talked about in the last slide? You don't know which one you need to use until you know what your research questions are. And you don't know what your research questions are until you have extensively and exhaustively reviewed the literature. So don't choose your method type. You will be in this class learning about all the methods types before you officially choose any of them, because I want you to be exposed to all of them while you're writing your research questions, designing hypotheses, and thinking all that through, and then you will choose your research methods types. And I will stop you if I think you're jumping the gun on that. It'll be obvious some that you're leaning towards because of the types of research questions, but I want you to stay open to things that you still don't know much about until we get into the class. Also, I save the most important for last. Be ethical and abandon ideas and plans if you cannot be ethical, which doesn't mean that you as a person can't be ethical, but you realize there's no way that you can do a particular study without doing something that would be deceptive or could potentially be harmful to someone else. At the point in which you recognize that that could be the case, and it could be psychological or emotional harm just in bringing someone through a traumatic experience, if it could be harmful, we're going to ask you to abandon it and try to get at the concern that you have in a different way. So what? What are you going to do with all this? Are we just torturing you for 16 weeks, putting you through a course, making you write a proposal because we have it in our learning outcomes? Well, I would argue that there's a lot more you can do with it than that. You will be an informed consumer of information after this. Usually about halfway through the course, students start saying, yeah, I totally read those articles or hear those news reports differently. I find myself wanting to understand, well, what is your source documentation when someone makes a claim? Or understanding how to read a research article and not glazing over after the first few sentences. Number 2, it'll help you understand workplace evaluations. I find that most of my students have been a part of, oftentimes they weren't really excited about it, but they've been a part of program or workplace evaluations. This will help you actually understand what they're doing and why, and maybe even become a key member of the team at the work that is assisting with those evaluations in one way or another. You can also develop workplace evaluations. You will have the skills to propose to your boss, your supervisor, your funder, or even to your team if you're the boss. Here's how we're going to effectively evaluate the work that we're doing because we've wanted to achieve X, Y, and Z goal, and here's our mission. Well, now I know how to make sure that we're actually getting there. And the beauty of an evaluation is it doesn't just tell you thumbs up, thumbs down, or a mix. A good evaluation also provides recommendations. So it sees it as, okay, now next, let's do this. Not that you ever come to an end, but an end of that evaluation cycle. Wash, rinse, and repeat, but not exactly repeat. Follow those recommendations. So don't be afraid of evaluations. When they end, they're just setting you up for the next phase. And then lastly, grant writing and fundraising. If you understand what is a measurable way of determining if something is effective, you can write grants or help your grant writers create elements within your workplace that are going to be appealing and quite fundable to funding resources and grant makers. Okay, I think I've shared enough with you. You've got a foundational sense for all the things that we're going to talk about and learn about in this class. You know what's going to be expected of you. Looking forward to it. Thank you.